Hello, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at some more political shifts. This time it's going to be for president between 1980 and 2020. So that's a 40-year span. It was a great year for the Republicans. So there's going to be a lot of blue shifts, but not entirely. So here's the usual spreadsheet that I made. It's not flashy, but it's got all the data. And the first column is the states. The second column is the 1980 Democratic vote, that is Jimmy Carter. The 1980 Republican vote, Ronald Reagan. The 2020 Democratic vote, Joe Biden. Followed by the Republican vote in 2020, Donald Trump. The next column is the Democratic shifts between those two elections, followed by the same shifts for the Republicans. And finally, the last column here is the net change between the two parties between the two elections. So real quick background about the 1980 election. It was a long time ago, but Ronald Reagan defeated incumbent Jimmy Carter. Reagan did carry 44 states. He got 489 electoral votes, and that is pretty much a massive landslide, but he did even better in 1984. We'll take a look at those shifts some other time, but Jimmy Carter, he only got 49 electoral votes. He got 41% of the popular vote compared to Reagan getting almost 51%. And there was also a third-party candidate, John Anderson. He took home about 6.5% nationally. Keep that in mind as we go through some of these states. Certain states, the third-party vote did play more of a role than others, and it does affect the shift sometimes more dramatically, jumping ahead to 2020. So let's get into these states, and we'll start here in Alabama. In 1980, Jimmy Carter got 47.5% of the vote. Ronald Reagan got 48.8%. That was a close one. Jump ahead to 2020. Joe Biden, he dropped all the way down to 36.6%. Donald Trump bumped it up all the way to 62%. That's a net loss of 10.9% for the Democrats, a net gain of 13.2% for the Republicans, and that's a total net change of 24.1% away from the Democrats and toward the Republicans. That's a pretty big red shift. And I also have the shading in this last column, as I usually do. The darkest colors, those are 10 or more point shifts, all the way down to the lightest colors. Those are under 5-point shifts. So 3 levels of shading. And now we know how this works, so we can go quickly through the rest of these states. In Alaska, that shifted toward the Democrats by a healthy 18%. Arizona, that also went toward the Democrats by a huge 32.7%. In Arkansas, that went huge in the other direction, back toward the Republicans by 27%. California had the biggest shift of all, and that went 46 points toward the Democrats. And part of that is because back then, California, not really the blue state we know it to be today, plus Ronald Reagan, that was his home state, and he was the governor for 2 terms in California, and he won it by more than 15 points. So that explains the huge swing. Next state, Colorado, that also went a massive 37.5% away from the Republicans toward the Democrats. Connecticut went bluer by 29.7%, Delaware by 21.2%, Florida as well by 13.7%. Florida was a lot redder back in 1980 than it was in 2020. Georgia went hard toward the Republicans by 14.5%, but back in 1980, Carter easily won it. That was his home state. He was the governor there, so that explains a lot of this shift. Let's move on to Hawaii. That went 27.5% toward the Democrats. Idaho, also toward the Democrats by 10.5%. Illinois, big shift there toward the left by 24.9%. Indiana, much smaller shift toward the left by 2.3%. Iowa, same direction by 4.5%. Kansas as well, just under 10% at 9.9%. Let's go on to Kentucky, and that state got a lot redder by 24.4%. Louisiana as well by 13.2%. Maine, double digits back toward the Democrats by 12.4%. Maryland, huge shift there, 30.3%. Massachusetts, even a little bit more by 33.6%. Michigan, 9.3% bluer. Minnesota, a smaller blue shift by 3.2%. Mississippi, that's back in the red by 15.2%. Missouri, also in the red by 8.6%. Montana, back toward the Democrats by 8.1%. Now we got a lot of shifts here toward the Democrats. There's some big ones in here. Nebraska, 20.4%. Nevada, 38%. New Hampshire, 36.6%. New Jersey, 29.3%, New Mexico, 29%, and New York, 25.9%. North Carolina also went in that direction, but that had a very small change, only 0.8% toward the Democrats. North Dakota, 4.6% toward the Democrats, and Ohio also in that direction by 2.5%. Oklahoma shifted toward the GOP by 7.6%. In Oregon, that shifted away from the GOP by 25.7%. Pennsylvania also by 8.3%, and Rhode Island by 10.3%. South Carolina, double digits toward the right by 10.1%. South Dakota, back to the left by 2.6%. Tennessee, that again goes back to the right by a huge 22.9%. Texas, that's back to the left by 8.3%. Utah got a lot bluer by 31.8%. Vermont used to be a lot redder, and it shows it got 41.4% bluer. Virginia also shifted toward the Democrats by 22.8, Washington by 31.6, West Virginia, that had the biggest shift toward the Republicans. That used to be a blue state. Carter won it in 1980. Since then, it shifted a ton, 43.4 toward the Republicans. Wisconsin, that's back toward the Democrats by 7.2, and the last state is Wyoming. That went back toward the GOP by 8.7. So those are all the states, but I also have Washington, D.C. on here. That's obviously very blue, but since 1980, it did shift 25.3 toward the Democrats. So Reagan got blown out there in 1980, but not nearly as bad as Trump did in 2020. So those are all the states and all the shifts. And as always, we can do one more thing with this data. If you want to help visualize it, we can apply it to a map. And here it is. Here's all the shifts. It's the same basic shading. The darkest colors are 10 or more point shifts. The very lightest colors, those are the tilt margins under 1 point. So we have 4 levels of shading. And there's definitely some takeaways from this map. Of course, the Northeast, New England, and the West Coast, and even just some of the West and Southwestern states, those have shifted pretty hard toward the Democrats. Florida even as well, even though today it's shifting back toward the Republicans. 1980 was definitely one of the better years for the Republicans, so they are coming down from a fairly high point. It wasn't their only great year they've had in the last 50 or 60 years, but it's definitely one of the better ones. Anytime you get over 400 electoral votes, you know you're doing something right. So where did the Republicans do well? Well, we could see it's pretty much mostly in the South. Missouri, Oklahoma, down and around back up to South Carolina, and also up there in West Virginia. Those are the states. They've become much more Republican over the last couple of decades. That's what stands out to me. Of course, there's plenty of other states. They've undergone their own political realignments, having a new political identity over that 40-year span. So this, of course, is not going to tell you everything, especially when you go from a blowout Republican win in 1980, where the incumbent Democrat was defeated, kind of to the opposite result in 2020, where an incumbent Republican was defeated. It wasn't a blowout electoral win, but it was enough of a win to have a lot of blue shifts on this map. So these are the shifts. I know Nebraska and Maine, they allocate their electoral votes by congressional district. The data is a little bit harder to find for those congressional districts, so I just have the at-large shifts on here. The 1980 election was a long time ago. Most people today are just going to read through it in the history books, and there was a lot of different political coalitions back then. Plenty of states would be unrecognizable with how they voted today. I guess that's what happens over 4 decades of political electoral history. So there's plenty more you could say about this, the candidates, the issues at the time. That's all for you to look into if you'd like, but these are just the shifts that I was able to put together. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of the shifts in any of these states? And do you enjoy seeing the data and seeing the map? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.